Good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. It is on coping with anxiety and maintaining mental well-being while living with VEDS. My name is Ryan. Honored to have you all here tonight. Living with VEDS brings unique challenges, and we talk a lot about emergency preparedness, but really no degree of trying to become prepared can really put us in the perfect spot to be able to handle the anxiety and things that stem from having an unexpected medical emergency or hospitalization. And so we didn't necessarily initially plan this. This got rescheduled a couple of times, but as we wrap up Mental Health Awareness Month, this is definitely an important topic for us to be chatting about. Managing anxiety and well-being after an event is important not only for the individual living with VEDS, but also for loved ones, caregivers, and really because we're all so connected, the community as a whole. So today's webinar aims to provide some practical guidance and emotional support, help you can navigate these difficult times with resilience and strength. We'll discuss effective coping strategies to manage anxiety and maintain mental well-being, emphasizing the importance of mental health again, in the aftermath of a VEDS-related event or hospitalization. Honored to welcome Dr. Melissa Flint today. Dr. Flint received both her master's and doctoral degrees in clinical psychology from the Arizona School of Professional Psychology at Argosy University. Dr. Flint serves as a tenured professor at Midwestern University in Glendale, Arizona. She's one of only a few people worldwide who hold her fellow in thanatology, which is an advanced certification in death, dying, and bereavement. Dr. Flint serves as a member of our, newly a member of our professional advisory board at the Marfan Foundation, and often speaks to our communities about mental health and quality of life issues, and has provided actually some invaluable training as well for staff members. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Flint, who will share her expertise and insights on this critical topic. We hope you find today's discussion valuable and empowering as we work together to support each other through the challenges of living with VEDS. We encourage you to submit your questions to the Q&A feature. I'll keep an eye on those, and we will set some time aside at the end to answer as many questions as we can. However, if your question is not addressed, we do encourage you to submit your question through our Help and Resource Center. So that is at thevedsmovement.org/ask. And this webinar is also being recorded and will be uploaded to YouTube for future viewing. So thank you for being here, and let's get started.
Thank you all for being here tonight. It's that midweek comp day, right, where you're not sure whether you can hang in there for another hour. And I so appreciate you being here. And it's always such an honor to spend whatever time I'm able to with you. Welcome to Through My Office, 102-degree balmy Glendale, Arizona. I know it's evening hours for most of you where you're at. So again, I just thank you for taking the time to set aside and talk about this really important topic. I want to start with, I see you and I see the very unique challenges that your community in particular faces. And again, just so honored to be able to offer some just thoughts and support, just like any of the other webinars that we do that have to do with mental well-being, emotional well-being. Not every slide and every idea will kind of hit home for each and every person, but if there's a couple of things that we can take away that is very much applicable that you can see yourself using, I count that as a victory. And I also welcome any other, questions as Ryan had put forward on how to submit them here today or even ask them later. So as we think about anxiety and well-being, those kind of seem like opposite ends of the spectrum, right? And we really go through life and we want life to be very balanced and okay and not threatening. Oops, let me back up for 1 second. I forgot to do my conflicts. I work at Midwestern. I have a private practice, but I do need to disclose that I'm a member of the Arizona Board of Psychologists Examiners. I received a governor's appointment this year. I just need to clarify that I'm speaking just as me today as a psychologist, not on their behalf. So there you go. All right. This is how we want life to be, right? Balanced and everything looking beautiful. And when you have a life-threatening chronic illness, it doesn't always feel like this. In fact, you might not remember the last time it felt like this. It really feels more like this game of Jenga, and there are players involved that you did not authorize and that you don't want playing. And any moment, one of those blocks can be taken out and it can just kind of crumble. And that is a different type of anxiety than the anxiety that might come with a financial stressor, or an anxiety that might come with, did I get a good grade on a test, right? It's completely different. And this kind of precarious game of Jenga that we're playing in life in general, as complicated as things can be, are really, it's heightened, of course, when you're dealing daily with so many of the individual intricacies of illness that you all face, or you're loving someone through as they face it. And I just want to very much validate that living and loving people that happen to also have VEDS makes this thread of the blocks all falling very, very real. And a lot of the people in our support systems that don't understand the gravity of it, their worst isn't necessarily dying, right? And so they can't wrap their head around that supportive language often that the community can. And I'm so thankful that you have that in one another. But there is this very real reality of in the next few moments, even something could change that could be very, very significant. And balancing still living with that kind of framework that is very much reality can be really difficult. So I'm so glad we're talking about this today. I want to particularly make note of the VEDS-related medical events, hospitalizations, the things that come with an alarming frequency can be particularly complicated. Those events can be traumatic in and of themselves. And when you have experiences that cause you to really evaluate living and life, and what do you do next to maintain and balance what you can and control what you can and live with what you can't, the overall feelings of anxiety are very naturally going up. So I want just to kind of start today, because of the audience that I'm talking to today, I really see some of the anxiety and some of the trauma as very much interconnected. And we're going to talk a little bit about that as we move through. But certainly events can lead to increased feelings of anxiety at minimum. And this idea of dis-ease, just not being at ease, which ironically, without the hyphen, is the word disease, which I always find a little bit interesting in our language and what things mean. Caring and connection within this community is critical, but it also comes with a price. And I would be remiss in not stopping for a moment and just recognizing that in your connectivity with one another, you hear all the goods and all the bads. And sometimes those bads are very loud and very powerful. And Ryan's been beautiful about kind of keeping me apprised of some of the challenges that have been facing your community with some very big losses of late. And I just wanted to take a second and say, again, I see you. And I grieve with you in those losses. And I didn't want us to go past and keep talking about this without just having a quick second of just recognizing that the connection is amazing. And the connection also makes us aware of some of the things that we fear most. Let's back up just for a second and talk about what anxiety really is, because it's become so colloquial that it's hard to tangle the colloquial from actually what might be clinical, what we might seek mental health services for. So I love this definition of it. Anxiety is a future-oriented emotional state resulting from perceptions of threat, characterized by a perceived inability to predict, control, or obtain desired results in upcoming situations. And I bet everyone on this call can think of at least a time where this was the definition of going into that appointment, or going into that surgery, or going into that hospitalization. And sometimes these future anxieties are much closer to now than we'd wish them to be. But anxiety really is that perceived threat, right? What can I control and not control? And am I going to be able to do what I need to do with it to stay alive at a very primal level? This is an interesting thought that I just want us to keep in mind. Anxiety as a emotional state actually serves a purpose for all of us. And it would be interesting to even ponder what life would be without anxiety, because anxiety sets off alarm bells for us so that we can react. If a bear walked into my office right now, let's hope that I don't sit here and go, oh, there's a bear. I wonder what I should do. Anxiety swells up, and primally, base of your brain, you react. Those same reactions happen when we're faced with things like appointments, hospitalizations, anything that can be perceived as a threat to our integrity of our life. So it's not just these ideas of something coming kind of and attacking us, but when it's inside your body, there's a whole different level of anxiety that comes with that. For many people, that feeling of anxiety passes. But for other people, those alarm bells are constantly going off and they become all encompassing and they impact all areas of life. And some of you might very much feel like you're more on that side of things than, oh, I'm glad that that passed and, it's until the next time kind of feeling. When we talk professionally about health related anxiety, it's always on a continuum. For some people, it's mild and transient. It just happens maybe before an appointment or, at time of diagnoses or, many moments, but they're transient and there's kind of relief in between them. The spectrum goes all the way over to chronic and severe, where this is really all I can think about. I am defined by this illness and not defined as a person who happens to have VEDS. Those are kind of wording that I often hear patients that I see talk about, which tells me and indicates to me that they're more on the chronic or severe side of this spectrum. But as you talk about your anxiety, health-related specific anxiety to professionals, normally they're kind of trying to gauge on a continuum where you're at more often than not. And this might help kind of understand what our thinking is as we're asking some questions of you. Now, how do we know when that normative situation, the reality that VEDS is a very serious process that needs a lot of care and concern, when that normal health anxiety is pushed into something we consider more clinical anxiety? So if you look at that arrow again, kind of severity from normal to clinical, of course you're going to have realistic fears, worries, concerns. Anybody who gives you a platitude, oh, if you just don't worry about it, it won't be so bad, doesn't understand the gravity of what you're going through. There's realistic fears that come along with this illness. There's worry, there's concerns, there's general anxiety, health-related anxiety. Now, when it slips to severe, we see things are clinical anxiety, clinical health anxiety. We're seeing things like misinterpretation of symptoms, where my hair falling out suddenly means I'm going to have an aortic dissection or something that may or may not be related, right? The thoughts are excessive, the feelings, the avoidance, or the over reassurance seeking, where every little detail has to be reassured and validated. Those might be indicators that we're sliding more into a clinical anxiety process, but a provider would have to sit down with you and really listen to your very unique experience. You cannot be grouped in even with all VEDS patients, right? Because each of you have a very unique process. And just because you have worries and anxieties doesn't mean you need to necessarily be on meds for anxiety, right? That would be a very personal decision between you and your provider. But this kind of explains a little bit about how we're looking at it as psychologists and perhaps even psychiatrists that might be involved in care. Now, anxiety might look different for us as well, and we might see some of these things like anger and frustration. It is very common for a client in session who has VEDS or other related conditions to say things like, why me? Why couldn't it just skip? Why? Kind of so many why questions. Anxiety might look like just that chronically facing the thought of your own mortality and worrying about the future, which is not often just worry about yourself, right? It's about your loved ones. It's about physical and emotional pain. It's very complicated. It's not just worry. Grieving the loss of the life that a lot of people talk about that they should have or they cannot have. The grief over the life that it has become as you cope with different things that might happen along the course of time that change how you can exist in this world or what accommodations or adaptations you might need to have. A lot of people also talk about things like the threat to the loss of yourself, where they start to feel like I am defined solely by the fact that I have VEDS. I'm going to encourage you to really fight that. You are a beautiful, unique, wonderful person who also happens to have VEDS. And there is so much more to the continuum of who you are that this is such an important part. And there are so many other important parts too. Another thing that I wanted to make sure that I just hit on is the top one on the second column. I've spent a lot of time talking with clients who have talked about this feeling of shame about how their illness affects the people in their life, what they can or cannot do. I just had a beautiful client a few weeks ago who really just physically wasn't able to go to their child's graduation, and the shame and guilt that kind of welled up about that. And we couldn't change the circumstance, right? It was very factual that in this moment in their illness, they couldn't go. It would be too much. And it was also very empowering to have that validated. And I hope you all have people in your lives that validate just where you're at. A lot of times when we're having conversations, here's a coping tidbit before we get to the coping section. When you're sitting down in conversations and you're in this moment of anxiety or panic or fear, sometimes you want people to help you problem solve, and sometimes you just need people to listen. And the listener, is often confused at what we need because they don't have a crystal ball. They can't read our mind. So sometimes starting the conversation, like, Mary, I am so glad you're sitting here with me. And I just want to tell you, I just need to vent right now. This is not a problem. I just need you to hear me, is a very different conversation than Mary jumping in and trying to problem solve for you. There are other conversations where you need two heads, right? So don't be afraid to ask for what you need in support. That I think is a very important thing that VEDS or not, we as people need to do a better job of, so that others can meet our needs when they're unsure of what they are until we tell them. This I just threw in there, and I will actually send slides to Ryan in case anybody wants copies of some of these. But anxiety comes across differently at different ages. So here's just some very general things. This is not even diagnostic, but just when you're looking at kiddos, when you're looking at teens versus looking at adults, there are some differences in symptoms that are all still indicative of what could be clinical anxiety, but maybe just very earned health anxiety. So what can we do realistically with these very real anxieties, these very real fears when we either live with VEDS or love someone with VEDS, or both for some of you? We're going to get into the nitty-gritty and talk about just some ideas. The first thing I'm going to encourage you to do, and I'm really proud of the Marfan Foundation as an organization and all the groups that go under that umbrella, because particularly in this last year, you guys have devoted an enormous amount of time to mental health. And that is stellar. And you are far ahead of many other organizations in your commitment to that. So the first step for any of us is deciding that our mental health is worth it. As hard as we fight to work and balance and take care of our medical needs, we need to also dedicate that time to our mental and emotional needs. What I can and can't control is a powerful mindset in restoring some balance when things seem really unbalanced. We're going to talk about some ways to think about that, and maybe some calls to action that might help us refocus a bit on making our mental health a priority and coping with these things that can happen for us. These are two of my favorite quotes when I think about making a choice in my mental health. Despair is a place where hope cannot flourish is one. I need to decide to not sit in despair some days, because there's a whole lot of despair. And I know you guys have all felt that at various levels, probably throughout your entire life. And so I believe that there's a part of that is choice, that I'm not going to sit in the despair. I'm going to visit the despair because it needs to have voice. It needs to be heard, but I'm not going to live in the despair. That's one decision that I've personally made. And there's another quote that comes from a person who survived the Holocaust, of Viktor Frankl. Talks about between stimulus and response, there's a space. So whatever happens in my response, there's a space. And in that space is my power to choose my response. And in that response lies my growth and my freedom. Despite circumstances that were completely intolerable and unavoidable, he still sat there in the middle of a concentration camp and said, I still choose what I do. And I think that's very powerful, even in light of a life-threatening chronic illness, of I still choose the living that I'm going to do. I'm choosing between that stimulus and the response, what I'm going to choose. They're very powerful statements, at least to me, and I just wanted to share them with you. Now, remember this slide. I want to go back to that a little bit and talk about the alarm bells, because there's a very important part of this that relates to trauma that you might not know or understand. And I just kind of want to lay it out there. And it might be something you've already heard before, so it's just a little refresher. Base of the brain, primal instinct, when we feel challenged or feel like there's a situation that we can't or might not be able to control or overcome, which is that definition of anxiety I gave you earlier, we do things very automatically, and they normally fall into categories that we call trauma responses, and they're well-learned patterns. They're not thought patterns. They just happen until we're aware of them and decide to change them if we want to and if we can. They just happen. And for some of you, you might be able to put yourself in these shoes when you think of some of the more maybe traumatic healthcare experiences that you've had. Some of you flee, right? You are not dealing with this. I can't. I just don't know how to handle it. Some fight. That may be verbally, maybe emotionally. Some people freeze. I don't know what to do. And other people, a newer one that's been added is something called fawn, a response of there's nothing I can do, I give up. Or a people pleaser, to always have things, people like you and think well of you. Codependency might fall into this category. And when we're looking at significant health-related events that have the potential to also be traumatic at times, if not just anxiety producing, but actually trauma, our base of our brain takes over. We're not really thinking, we're acting first. This is the same response that you might get when you're driving down the road and a car pulls into your lane and you have to make a very quick response. You didn't think that through, it just happened. And so these responses happen for us. And sometimes they happen in ways that are incongruent with getting our needs met. And so being really aware of them and what I tend to do, what I automatically do when I feel threat, might be helpful in kind of understanding between the stimulus and response. Is there a space where I can alter that and make that a little bit different? And really what we're talking about is something called the window of tolerance. So that yellow line is kind of the roller coaster that we're on a daily basis, right? If we're hyper aroused, we're going to have things like high energy or anxiety, anger, feeling overwhelmed, fight, flight kind of mode. If we're hypo aroused, we're shut down. This is the freeze or even the fawn part of that last slide. Where we want to be is kind of in that middle, grounded, flexible, curious. Well, I wonder what today is going to bring. Not, I'm pretty sure I'm going to die today kind of mentality. Self-regulation, being able to sit with the complexity of life and not run from it or ignore it, kind of be in that. And the window of tolerance when we have chronic illness is often narrow. And so one of the things that we can do is expand our window of tolerance just by little bits at a time so that we're spending more time in kind of a grounded space. Now, what does that mean for mental health? There's a therapy style called dialectical behavioral therapy that really has a lot of informative practice when we're thinking about chronic illness and especially life-threatening chronic illness. There's the two circles that overlap, right? So one mind, what is called wise mind, is very rational. I make decisions based on what makes intellectual sense, science, the 7 doctors I've seen. It's logical, it's percentages, it's that kind of decision-making process. Opposite of that is the emotional. Decisions that are based on what feels good, more emotional, can be more reactive or defensive. And it's often opposite of what is rational mind. And a lot of us bounce between the two on a daily basis. I know just today, I've kind of sat in both of those places instead of the wise mind. So these are reminders for me, just like they're reminders for you. In that wise mind, that middle, we're trying to strike a balance. We're living very mindfully, which I know we've had tons of webinars on, kind of that mindfully aware of what's going on for me right now and what I need, and being able to verbalize what I need and ask for it. It's that honoring, nurturing, emotional place where we're not ignoring the emotional, but we're not letting it be overrun by the rational. If we can sit in this space more often, which is our window of tolerance, if we kind of apply these two slides together, the anxiety can come down a little bit. I will never guarantee you that the anxiety will go away, because remember, we're supposed to have some anxiety. It helps us react. It's the bell, the alarm. But we can't live in chronic debilitating anxiety. Those are two ends of the spectrum. So some of you might have heard the concept of living your dash. What does this mean, and why is it important when we're thinking about our mental health? Many people think about the beginning, the date of birth, right? If we use this analogy of the headstone. Where did I come from? What happened to me? Whose fault is it? Is even a question that some people ask. If only it wasn't X way, kind of an indication of stuckness. And then there's the end, which we don't know. Every one of us has that unknown moment. When you have a chronic illness that has life-threatening variables to it, though, that end point might seem like it's a day away, or it might be 20 years away. We just don't know. And that's part of the anxiety. What Living Your Dash talks about is we can spend, every one of us have these two, welcome to humanhood. But how many of us are completely not living the middle part, the dash, the now, the moment, what I have and don't have control over, how I can be my best self despite the fact that this hand that I've been handed is pretty darn challenging, and I wouldn't wish it on another person, and all those complex emotions, right? And there are many people, and I've seen them over the years. I think I'm 27, 8 years into some sort of mental health practice as a psychologist. Many people live beginning and end and have no dash. They're only focused on what's going to take them out of this world, or what brought them in that wasn't right or didn't work or shouldn't have been that way. And we're forgetting the entire middle part. This also applies to that quote from Viktor Frankl, doesn't it? Between stimulus and response, there's a space. Between beginning and end, there's a space. And I have to be honest with you, there have been many times where I've focused on one of the two endpoints and have not been living the dash. And it's a challenge, and it's a decision to refocus on that. This is the poem, and I won't take time to read it again if it's something of interest to you. This is kind of the poem from where this idea actually came from somebody's eulogy for their friend, and talking about what really matters in life. And what really matters, what's in that dash, is completely up to us. It is not dictated by anybody else. It's dictated solely by us. So there's a really nice poem that kind of goes along with this idea. But I hope that it's more than just a poem. I hope that it's a lived experience. And I certainly need lots of reminders sometimes that the dash is the most important and what I need to focus on in this moment. Another kind of concept that meshes well with this and how we cope with serious illness, how we cope with health-related events that maybe didn't go as well as we had hoped, challenges in getting care that we need, is the idea of a stress distress impairment continuum. So welcome to the real world. We all have stress. Individuals living with VEDS and those who love them have a unique up the ante kind of stress because of all the complexities that you live with. And that if we fall into the normal circle that people go through, stress, often untapped stress, unmediated stress goes to distress, then we start to see the impairment, and then it goes into improper behavior. Maybe that improper behavior is withdrawal from medical sources. Maybe it's withdrawal from family, friends, support of others, from faith, or from whatever we find helpful because we get so stuck, kind of again back in that this is too stressful and I cannot overcome it anxiety. So a colleague of mine, a psychologist by the name of Dr. Bryant, she took this distress impairment improper behavior continuum, which is going to the right, and said, wait a minute, we can't just sit here in this world and expect that stress is the norm, that stress is the best we're going to get. She said there's two things to the other side of that, being surviving and flourishing. In the lived experience that many of you share, stress is inherent in that anxiety. We could even use those words interchangeably. And many of you might feel that you are either in distress, or some of you might feel like you're getting by, you're surviving. But I want to encourage you to think about the possibility that there's something even greater than surviving. And that surviving, that flourishing, looks different for everybody. And I know that some of you are going to take that nice concrete path up there because that's just how you do it. Safe, stable, concrete under your feet. And others of you are going to take this other path and jump right into that water puddle that is up by the pathway, because that's how you take the world. And again, between stimulus and response, there's that space where we get to choose how I'm going to respond, how I'm going to choose, what I'm going to do with this really incredible deck of cards that have been handed. this is a power, it's a basic thought, right? It's, yeah, intuitive at some level, but as human beings, we often need to be we need to be reminded that angst, mental angst, barely getting by, suicidal thinking, depression, chronic anxiety, unresolved trauma is not the norm. And we've kind of gotten up to a place in society where that seems like kind of that's the norm. It shouldn't be. So, what are we going to do as we reclaim our mental health, as we put a lot of emphasis on that to help mediate for that a little bit? What path are you going to choose to flourishing? That the expectation is that I can knock this out of the park. Whatever moments I have in my dash, whether that be 10 years or 50 years or whatever length that might be, what am I doing with that? And that is fully my choice and my control. And I encourage you to take that control back. Sometimes in chronic illness and where there's lots of health interventions, lots of opinions, lots of you shoulds, lots of those things, we forget that we don't need to give all of our power out to the others, that we can reclaim some of that power for ourselves. And that will help sustain some of these things that we're talking about today. I'm going to encourage you, another coping source is find resources that resonate with your soul. One of my go-tos is Brene Brown. I appreciate the fact that she's very transparent with her own struggles, and that she also wants people to be the best selves that they can be, and that looks different for everyone. This particular one, Wholehearted Living, is a mindfulness focused, understanding self and reactions type living. And one that she talks about a lot is anxiety as a lifestyle. Our culture looks at busyness and anxiety almost as a badge of honor in a weird way. And she talks about replacing that with calm and stillness. Now, how can I be calm when I have this thing that could just happen at any minute? Yeah, I'm going to absolutely validate that. And in that wise mind idea, right? Some of you might vacillate from the living in the side where it is rational. Some might be fully emotional. Really, what calm and stillness is talking about is just bringing it back to the middle, where I can make the best decisions for myself in these moments, where I can make sure that I've let those around me know what the best decisions are, if I can, if they're put in a place where they need to speak for me, all those things, the preparedness that you all have talked about so often. And even with all that preparedness, there's just still so much that is out of the control of us as individuals. But finding resources that resonate with your soul, and then I want you to post them. It's beautiful to run across something like this and go, oh, I love that, and then scroll by or not remember. This is posted on my wall right in front of me in my office, along with some other things that are very, very powerful, including that Viktor Frankl quote. Because you know what? I sometimes have cognitive impairment and I forget the things that I should be doing for myself and my mental health. So there's my reminder wall. Most of my students have never seen it because they come in and sit down. They don't know what's behind them. And on graduation day, I've had students come in and take a picture of that because they wanted to know what I was thinking as they were sitting in that chair. And I wonder what our lives would look like if we reminded ourselves of what we found important in this perfectly imperfect life that we live, and give ourselves grace and knowing that sometimes we need reminders. These are more coping strategies. They're options, and not all of them will sit for each one of you in the same way. But this tree of contemplative practices talks about the very bottom at the roots, communion and connection, which you have in this organization in a beautiful way. And then we're bringing in kind of that self-awareness of who am I as a part of this, but also who am I as a solo as well, right? And as we go up the tree, it talks about all these different things that we can do to slow down and be in that space of more calm, more regulated, more effectual in our lives, because we're not bouncing from the extremes. And for some of you, that might be things like visualization or prayer or meditation. Some of it might be some sort of movement oriented thing, obviously related and kept in mind with what medical restrictions there might be and safety protocols, but things like gratitude or silence, ceremony, establishing advocacy work, volunteering, activism. There's many things that we can do that will help plug those holes that feel really empty when things get anxious and out of control. And we want to kind of ground ourselves back down again. Other things that we can do, there's so many. Like I said, just on that last slide, many different types of contemplative practices. Maybe for some of you, it's meditation. It could be prayer. It could be many other things. Mindfulness, breathing activities. The webinar that just happened not long ago about different techniques to kind of cope with and be more mindful of being back in your body. Gratitude's an important one for me. I don't know if you've noticed, but it is hard to be angry and grateful at the same time. And I need to remind myself to choose to be grateful more than I choose to be angry. And so practicing gratitude is powerful. Learning to say no when it's appropriate, right? To set boundaries for your physical and emotional experience. I'm going to encourage you to look at your circles of support. When we are in a situation, medically or otherwise, that requires a lot of support because stuff keeps happening, right? We have a circle. And when an event happens, I call it circling the wagons, right? We bring our resources close, we draw from what we need, the temporary support and help until we can get back into that broader space. Maybe that's making meals for the kids or driving to appointments or whatever it might look like, right? So circling the wagons. There are people in your circles who do not belong in those wagons. If we really look at the entirety of our supports, I bet each one of you can think of supports that aren't really supports, that you're more supporting them than they can support you. It is okay not to put them in the wagons. That time of crisis, when you need the supports, who are in your wagons? Who are you circling yourself with? And sometimes learning to say no is not allowing in the non-support of others in times of crisis. Because I don't know about you, but sometimes I feel like in crisis, I'm babysitting their needs more than anybody's helping with mine. And so I really want you to think about who are in your wagons, who are you calling on in those times of crisis that need to be in the center, need to be right around you, and who can remain off in the distance. Self-compassion, this is a big one. We live in a world right now that there's not a lot of self-compassion. And there are moments that you are going to be stellar with your emotional health. And then there's moments where you are going to be like, can I have a do-over on that one? Because I just screamed at my kid and it had nothing to do with them. Or I just, that lab screwed up again and I'm angry and I'm calling everybody, whatever the circumstance is. I can be angry and validate that. I can be hurt and validate that. I can be joyful and experience that. The realm of emotions, right? And without self-compassion, those moments that were not our best, we use as weapons against ourselves. And I want us all to stop doing that because there are all moments where we're not our best self. There are many moments where we are our best self. And self-compassion kind of helps us figure out those moments. And between stimulus and response, again, that thought, I get to choose to sit in self-compassion, and those edges get a little less sharp when I do so. Courageous vulnerability, another Brene Brown concept. I'm sure she got it from somewhere else, but that's who I pin it on. It takes a beautiful, courageous person to live a life well lived with the complications that VEDS brings. And it is possible, and I've seen it, and I know you guys have seen it too. And that courageous vulnerability is something that I want you to latch onto. That it is courageous to say, I don't know, that it's courageous to say, I do know, that it's courageous to say, I just need to sit in this pain for a minute because I don't know what to do with it. And it's courageous to say, I've sat in the pain long enough, I'm going to move forward now. All of those kind of dichotomies, right? Courageous vulnerability, such an important piece of mental well-being. Monitoring and protecting your self-esteem, knowing again who's helpful and who's not to you. And also, I want to encourage you to consider the things that you're telling yourself as well, because we are our own worst enemies. I don't know if you've noticed that. I say things to myself that I would never verbalize out loud to anybody else because it would be too mean, too ugly, too hateful, too vengeful. But yet I say it to myself. What? And we all do it. That's part of, again, being human. I wonder what it would be like if, when I heard those messages coming to myself, I say, I don't accept that message today. I don't accept that right. No, that's not true. And really work on those thought patterns that we break ourselves down into being less resilient when we're doing that to ourselves. When negative thoughts take over, disrupt them, the lab always screws up, the doctor isn't listening. Is that true? And we need to make changes to the plan. Absolutely, that's one option. Another option is that it's that negative thought cycle that we expect others to fail us. And so we just kind of put that expectation out there, and that negative cycle continues. Value and commit to self-care. I think just being here tonight, you're already showing that. I want you to laugh. I want you to laugh a lot. When we laugh, there are endorphins released in our body that is a miraculous natural anti-anxiolytic, anti-anxiety, and antidepressant. The qualities of those endorphins that are released actually have the capacity to change our mental state. So laugh and laugh loud and laugh a lot. Stay away from those short-term fixes, the bad habits. It's really easy to kind of try and maybe drown ourselves with alcohol or eating or whatever it might be. But those short-term fixes can be really impactful, especially when we're dealing with medical complications. And just a couple more ideas before we stop and take some questions or thoughts. I wanted to talk specifically about health-related visit anxiety, and I was able to do an in-service here for some of our doctors that had the same stuff in it. I thought, wait a minute, I'm going to share this with you guys too. You and your mind are your most powerful tools when you're approaching a challenge. And I would say that almost every health-related visit is a challenge at some level. I wonder what would happen if you considered these self-reflective questions prior to your next appointment. And I'm going to ask another question here of, do the answers give you any clues about what you need for that to be more successful? So some of the questions are this: what worries come to mind when you think about this appointment? How do these worries show up in your body? I instantly get a headache. I could feel my blood pressure going up, whatever that might be. So where is it showing up in your body? If you could put all the emotions you feel about this appointment into words, what would those emotions be? This might just be kind of a free association, little notepad writing. It could just be in your head. You could verbalize it to a trusted partner or friend or colleague or supporter. What could help you feel more supported and heard during your appointment? What questions or observations would you like to discuss with your doctor or other healthcare professionals? And how can you show your body compassion when you're feeling worried during the appointment? When you get into that place of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, which happens with astonishing frequency when we're in a high stakes medical appointment or hospital type setting in particular. How do you show your body compassion when you're feeling worried? And how do we circle the wagons to provide some of that additional support? And I wonder if you were able to do some of these self-reflective practices before some of these events. Now, obviously, some events just happen. There's no preparation. There's no self-reflection. Aside from those, the ones that we are able to kind of prepare for and come in with a resilient space with us, some of the answers to these questions might really tell us what we need to be more, to feel heard, to feel validated, to feel like we're taking back our power when sometimes it feels like every ounce of your power has been taken away and that anxiety just starts to well up. This is a way to step back into it. Again, between the stimulus, the appointment, and my response, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, is a space. And what am I going to do with that space? What am I going to do with that dash of that moment, that dash? All of these things hopefully are kind of layering upon one another, and you're finding things that resonate with you. These are some of the references, and there's many, many more out there. And so I'm going to stop screen sharing and kind of bring over Ryan so I can see him. And what questions are coming in or thoughts are you seeing, Ryan? Thank you so much for this time.
So first of all, thank you so much. This was very helpful information, and I wanted to thank everybody for attending tonight. It's a difficult topic, but obviously a very critical one. So right now, no questions have come in. I have a handful that I have written, And if I see a question come in the interim, your question will trump mine. Uh, However, so I'll just start asking those. But again, if you have any questions, feel free to submit them via the Q&A. They will be kept anonymous. If you do want to submit questions outside of the webinar, again, the Help and Resource Center is there to help, and may even involve Dr. Flint in answering some of those as they come in. So the
Sure.
website for that is thevedsmovement.org/ask. And so my first question is, being part of a tight-knit community is especially if you're living with a rare condition, is obviously extremely important. We seek strength and support in one another, and it's a source of education and all sorts of wonderful and important things. However, when it is, a community of individuals that are facing sometimes frequent medical concerns, as a result of the same condition that one has, and also is a fairly frequent reminder of what we may face ourselves. And while the community is important, then it does make it sort of difficult to live in the dash, like you had spoken about. So, any practical advice for, having that information come in sort of as unexpectedly as one's own medical emergencies might come up, and how to kind of handle that.
As you were asking that question, I was reminded of a beautiful client that I worked with several years ago now. And when we were processing the angst of the constant connectedness and the knowing of the threat of that might be me in 10 seconds, in 10 years, that could be me, is a very real feeling. And the way they described it, and this might resonate with people, is the threat of something bad happening, and the bad maybe even being death. She said, I see the Grim Reaper in the doorway, and there are some times where I need to say, not now, go sit down. I have to live this second right now. I'm not going to think about you. And it was for her a conscious decision. And I thought that was so powerful, and also has a couple of other resonating moments when we have a community that is well connected, especially over the computer, where 24/7 there's often a way to get a hold of somebody. It can be kind of a rabbit hole where we spend all our time there and no time living outside of that presence. Those were some balancing acts that we really needed to work on. And for some people, working on it with a therapist makes a lot of sense. For others, just being aware of the amount of time maybe spent connected versus connected with family. When those are getting out of balance, the anxiety goes up. The anxiety doesn't go down when we're out of balance. So seeking life balance in the ways that we can. If I've spent 2 hours on the computer researching, have I also spent a couple hours with my kiddos or with my partner, or in the sun, or reading my poetry, whatever brings you life and brings you joy? That out of balance brings more anxiety. So balancing it as best we can. But I want to validate, these are not made up anxieties. These are very real. And so we can't just say, well, just don't think about it. You think about it all the time. Every twinge, every new feeling of something, is that my bowel, is that, it could be anything. And so I don't want to minimize that, because that's very real. But we also can't just live in that all the time. There has to be some balance, and balance is going to look different for each and every one of us in different phases in treatment. Like in the hospital, balance looks like what everybody's telling you to do. In home, it might be a little bit different. So that also needs to morph depending on the scenario that we're in this moment.
Excellent. Thank you. I did have a question that came in, so like I
Yeah.
promised, that trumps any questions that I had. What are some red flags, if someone wants to be sort of self-aware of when they may need to seek out extra support? What are some red flags that one can look for in oneself?
There's an analogy using a thermometer that we use in mental health a lot. Where's your average temperature, so to speak? Like on an average day, I'm at a 50 or a 40 or whatever. If you're feeling like that thermometer is jumping in increments of 10 or 20, that's a self-awareness, right? What is happening? Where is this in my body? What is impacting this? A lot of people talk about it as triggers, but I actually am choosing to kind of change that and reframe that for myself. there's a lot of triggers in life, but really what they are is activators. I'm responding to whatever's happening. So when I'm more aware of what I'm responding to, I can choose how to maybe respond differently if I want to. If I don't want to and I want to be angry and say a few swear words or do whatever I need to do, fine. We're adults, we can choose to do that. But I think when that thermometer starts going up and you start feeling the increase in tension, when you start feeling like you need to do this to yourself, that's a physical manifestation of anxiety. Um, Ticking in different ways, maybe all of a sudden your leg, you can't stop it from shaking, or even your hands. Those are all signs that you're getting out of your window of tolerance and you're getting into hyperarousal. And that's time to call in some of the supports. And maybe the support is saying, I need to take a 10-minute timeout. Give me 10 minutes. Family out. I'm gonna do my prayer, meditation, or relaxation, or breathing, or I'm just gonna sit in this moment and realize why I'm feeling this way. Life is busy and fast, and fast breeds anxiety. You need to slow down when we start feeling that kind of thermometer, the temperature, so to speak, go up. I hope that answered a little bit of it.
Yeah, it was very helpful. Thank you. I think we had chatted about this during one of our phone calls, but I had chatted a little bit about, for many people during a hospitalization, there's a huge relief when it's time to go home. However, when you're living with a connective tissue condition, and if the reason you were in the hospital was something significant, going home also means that expert medical providers aren't right outside the door anymore. And
Yeah.
with that comes a lot of anxiety. So wondering if you have any sort of advice on sort of having those thoughts once you're home.
Mm-hmm. The first thought that comes to mind is validating the realness of that statement, and that you are not odd in thinking that. You're not odd in feeling that. You're not odd in having the kind of the going home be both joyful but also terrifying. Who are your trusted others that are your emotional supports in that moment? And can you be honest with them? I'm so looking forward to going home, but I'm terrified. Does that mean that you arrange with those wagons as you circle them and choose wisely who's in them, that one of those supports does a check-in with you every couple hours? No response needed, or, kind of just whatever might happen, that they can just sit there and not problem solve it for you. Oh, but aren't you excited to go home? Yes. And that means that they're not right down the hall if something happens again. Those kind of moments of being aware of what you need and asking for it. Oftentimes we're aware, but we're afraid to ask. We're afraid to put a burden on others. If we've chosen our wagons wisely and who are in those wagons, they are often so relieved to have us actually ask for something we need, because they don't know what to do to help. And so often we're giving them a gift as well for our caregivers and loved ones, because we're telling them what we need and what will be helpful versus just letting people guess. But yes, yes, and yes, of course, it's anxiety producing. And what do you need to feel more secure? Do you need to not sleep alone down the hall in the bedroom by yourself? Do you need to, make sure that meal times are very scheduled so that you know when people are going to be around? It could look like a variety of things, but the first, sit in the acknowledgement of yes, and I'm not crazy, or I'm not mentally ill because I'm feeling this way. It's very normal with health anxiety. And what do I need to help bring that thermometer down? And that's going to look very different for everybody, but sitting in that and seeking the calm of asking for support can be one of the most powerful antidotes to that.
I just had quite a lengthy comment come in, so I'm going to read and process that while you answer my next question,
Sure.
just so that we don't completely derail this. No one wants to sit and watch me read. So you had brought up the idea of guilt. Sometimes I think we're mindful of how our condition has put our loved ones and our family in a position of extreme challenges as well. And so during a time when we really should be focusing on not only our own physical healing, but our mental well-being after a hospitalization, it is very easy also to maybe feel a bit of guilt about what our condition has put our loved ones through. So while I read the comment that came in, if you can address that idea.
Yeah. There is guilt is a tough one because there are things that we will naturally feel guilty for, and that is, putting somebody out or bringing kind of uncertainty to a situation or whatever it might look like. The people who love us understand that nobody signed up for this voluntarily this morning, that this is the hand dealt, and that their expression of love for us is being there, and sometimes being there in ways that we don't need, so we need to correct that, and asking for them to be there in ways that we do need. And the guilt, I'd like you to acknowledge it, but not sit with the guilt, because there is going to be no productivity in staying in guilt. I want you to acknowledge it if you feel it. It's very real. It's a hard one to kind of navigate. And likely the people in your circle, your close circle, if we've chosen well, those circled wagons, are not feeling it exactly the same way as you're perceiving it. And as you're giving yourself self-compassion, I want you to give them compassion, that they're adults or helpers in ways, and they can tell you if it's too much and they need to step back, and that we can both do that kind of salsa dance of balance. And I need to trust that they'll tell me when it's too much, and they're going to know that I'm going to tell them when it's too much, and we'll be able to pull back and kind of do that balancing and rebalancing. When I talk with family members, often they will look at the person who's feeling guilt and say, "What on earth? No, of you. I'm here for you." And so it might even be worth a conversation. Hey, I'm identifying guilt and allowing them to kind of resonate how they're really feeling. You share how you're feeling, they share how they're feeling. And suddenly some of the question marks start to go away because we actually know what we're dealing with versus thinking about that we know what somebody else is feeling. I hope that makes sense.
So we actually, besides that comment, there is one more question that came in. I think we'll have time to address the one last question.
Okay.
And then the comment that came in is actually a very wonderful one that I want to just read, and we'll end with that. So the question that came in is, how can you relay that your health-related anxiety is valid when people say, well, at least you don't have this or that, something that they perceive as being worse than what you are going through? And this person commented that they've had a number of therapists say this to them.
Oh my gosh. I
Yeah.
am sorry from our profession, first of all. And in grief work, which I mainly do, I hear this all the time. Well, at least you have another child, or at least, that kind of thing. So I totally get it. Oh, platitudes. Platitudes come from a place of not helping for us. It's expressing discomfort in them. And instead of me trying to fix their discomfort, I need to go, well, in my head, now that was one of the dumbest things I've heard today, not helpful, not supportive. And then my choice is that person maybe isn't in that inner circle, circling the wagons, because they are downplaying the reality of my situation. What people often don't understand is this isn't a discomfort chronic illness. That's very different than something that could actually take your life, and has. And you've seen people, and those are the bookends here. And if they only have perspective of that it's just a little uncomfortable, they're going to say things like that. So those are the people that don't have a broad enough perspective to really be helpful for you. They probably shouldn't be in your inner circle. It's okay to say no.
Thank you. So again, we also just got, I think, what is a really good comment that came in. And again, we'll end there. But as a reminder, if a question comes up, sometimes the webinar ends and you go, oh, I wish I had used this. Our Help and Resource Center is available in there for you 24/7. So please take advantage of that. It's at thevedsmovement.org/ask. It can be a medical related question. We have access to all sorts of individuals on our professional advisory board that can answer any questions that you have, whether it be related to surveillance, management, or mental health. So please take advantage of that. And as a reminder, also, this is being recorded and will be up on YouTube within probably about a week and a half. And so finally, the comment that came in that I had taken some time to read while you were chatting was that for my own mental health, I find that I can only interact with the VEDS community online to a certain degree, or it does start to take over my mindset in a more negative way. So you had chatted a little bit about that, what having VEDS means and its negative effects on our lives. I want to say that I'm mindful of and grateful for those who post informative and supportive content frequently and are more active in the online community than I personally am, because they are the heavy, quote unquote, heavy lifters in my mind, and the glue that holds the compassion and information sharing all together in this community. So I think that is a wonderful thought. And this is, again, this is a person who is finding a balance and has identified that that they may not be able to be as engaged at times with the online community, and that is okay as well. But we do know that there are some people that are very active in the community. And again, they are doing the quote unquote heavy lifting. And I am thankful for the entire community and everybody that is there to provide strength and support to one another. So on that note, Dr. Flint, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your expertise with us. And I would like to thank everybody who attended. I would like to thank everybody who references this YouTube video in the future. I do think this is such an important topic, and it's I think a great way to wrap up Mental Health Awareness Month. Although, as Dr. Flint mentioned at the foundation, this is definitely a goal of ours to not necessarily focus on mental health awareness just during the month of May, but this is a year-round endeavor. So thanks again, everybody, and I hope that you all have a wonderful night.